Satanic Temple is a non-theistic religious organization. We fight for the recognition of non-theistic religions, meaning we don't feel that superstition should be privileged over the deeply held beliefs of non-believers. And for us, Satan is a literary metaphorical construct that embodies the ultimate rebel against tyranny, the oppressive structure of theocratic governance, and the kind of feudalistic, patriarchal, old fundamental cultural mythology that kind of stifles our progress. We don't worship a personal Satan. We don't believe in the supernatural, but we do see the story of Satan starting really with Paradise Lost and Milton, working its way to the romantic literary tradition of Byron, Blake, and Shelley, as being kind of an important restructuring of the cultural mythical backdrop to embrace Enlightenment values, the pursuit of knowledge, science as an arbiter of truth, something that doesn't claim to be the one true voice of salvation in a kind of monocultural tradition, but embraces pluralism. Well, Satan is by far the more sympathetic character in the Bible and even the literature inspired by the Bible. On the one hand, you have this rather petty and tyrannical God that demands fealty and subjugation. And on the other hand, you have a character who's willing to rebel against that entirely, knowing that it puts the highest universal power against him, but still is willing to fight on behalf of certain kind of humanistic goals and artistic creativity. There are people who blame us for everything or ascribe to us whatever they think is wrong with the world. But there's people who understand us in multiple different ways and like us for who we are and various aspects of what we are. There's a lot of people who don't understand the totality of what we are and what we do, but we have a lot of atheists who see our activism as being very relevant and very helpful to the goal of promoting secularism and or pluralism. And we have other people who really embrace Satanism and the Satanic Temple as their kind of sense of cultural identity and community, and really their religious description, and that defines who they are really personally. And neither of those is wrong or mutually exclusive, and there's some people who understand both aspects of that. Sometimes we get some of the atheist crowd who can be a little disappointed, actually, that people identify with the Satanic Temple as an authentic religious identity. And I often think that that's because in the atheist community, there's been a lot of decrying religion without thought of what a non-theistic religion could be, or its utility, or the purpose for some people in identifying with religion that has nothing to do sometimes with superstition. And I think the more you advocate for non-theistic religions, the more we'll possibly see non-theistic Christians, Muslims, Jews, and we already see a lot of non-theistic Jews, honestly. And I think that's for the better, because once we're left without supernatural divine fiats, all we're really left with is arguing the empirical proof, and that can only be a source of progress. You'll see a lot of the things the Satanic Temple does, a lot of the protest actions by some of our chapters are put into a ritualistic format, and they're done publicly. And I think that's another point where people look at that and say that's not authentic religious expression, because it's clearly done in protest, like when we do things counter-protesting protesters at Planned Parenthood and those types of things. And you can see videos on YouTube where we've done these kinds of ritualized counter-protests or protests, depending on whatever the scenario is. I think that's very much what ritual is and what ritual should do, especially if you're not invoking ritual for superstitious purposes. You don't think you are channeling your will to make something happen without actually engaging with the real world on any tangible level. But when you are doing a kind of ritualized protest and you are provoking certain reactions, making people think differently, or you're able to express your discontent in a rather kind of theatrical way, I think that does fulfill the requirements of ritual. And it's far more profound for the people engaged in it than simply holding a sign or even maybe writing a letter, although those things are fine too. Well, when we first actually wrote a letter to Oklahoma stating our intention of donating a monument to go alongside the Ten Commandments monument, we didn't actually have a monument in mind. We didn't have a design already in place. We had to come up with one after the fact. And Baphomet is what we settled on eventually because we felt it perfectly kind of paralleled some of the arguments for the Ten Commandments being placed on the Capitol grounds. For one thing, Oklahoma was claiming, and now Arkansas is claiming the same. Oklahoma was claiming that because this was a privately donated monument, it didn't violate the Establishment Clause. Other private donors could donate monuments as well, but more importantly, they were saying that the Ten Commandments was not meant to be taken as a religious monument, but as a monument to a historical document that spoke to the codification of constitutional law. And we'll set aside dissecting whether or not there's anything similar between the Constitution and the Ten Commandments. Just to spoil that, there isn't. But in any case, we wanted a monument that kind of fulfilled those requirements, that both spoke to the codification of U.S. constitutional law, had religious implications, but wasn't that. And of course, it was going to be privately donated. And we also wanted it to have meaning in the context of what we were trying to convey ultimately, and that was that we are a pluralistic society, and if you're going to have a Ten Commandments monument, you have to be prepared to have another religious viewpoint represented in an open forum. The government needs to remain neutral. Baphomet is this image that's been kind of satanized through time. There was a occult historian, Eliphas Levi, in the 19th century who drew the original picture of the hermaphroditic Baphomet character with the goat head and the human body and the caduceus in the center. We wanted to use Baphomet for our monument because we felt those binary elements spoke to the idea of the reconciliation of opposites. Pointing above, below. You'll notice the pentagram in the back has 2 points up, and the one on the head has 1 point up. And the caduceus, of course, symbolizing reconciliation and negotiation. We took off the breasts, which kind of compromised the hermaphroditic features, and as the compromise to that, we put a male and female child at each side. We took away the breasts because having anything clothing the female chest just didn't look right artistically at all, but we knew if we had bare female breasts on the monument, they would take that opportunity to claim that they couldn't accept the monument on decency grounds or something ridiculous like that. And we didn't want to avoid the actual issue that we were confronting. So we had this monument, and we wanted it to express those binary elements, and we wanted it only on grounds where a Ten Commandments monument already existed to kind of fulfill that entire message of the reconciliation of opposites. And further, we were saying that this monument would pay homage to those killed in the witch hunts, those otherwise maligned, thrown in prison, or unjustly accused. And that spoke to the codification of secular law, the burden of proof, innocence until proven guilty, and just the evidential standards that are now the norm in secular courts of law. Because the witch hunts, while we're certainly not celebrating those, they did inform that kind of progress, and we should be reminded that those things happened so that they never happen again. So we feel we built a really strong case for the presence of Baphomet on the public grounds if the arguments for the Ten Commandments were to be taken seriously. And ultimately, the Ten Commandments came down in Oklahoma. That was an ACLU lawsuit against the Ten Commandments being there, and the state Supreme Court ruled that it was, in fact, a violation of the state's own separation of church and state clause in the state constitution. And now the same fight is being fought in Arkansas, where it seems soon we'll be able to present our own lawsuit against the Ten Commandments monument as soon as it goes up, because they haven't, in fact, rejected our monument. You know, people look at the kind of imagery we use, and I think they see its utility in these activist battles we do, and because of that, they think that that's its only purpose, that the value is only external to us, that it doesn't mean something to us personally. It's not something, for lack of a better term, sacred or something we have reverence for. But certain aesthetic values can really define you as well and establish your sense of self-identity. And I think that satanic aesthetic is one of those things for me and for many of the people in the Satanic Temple. And at the time the idea of the Baphomet monument was new, we did see a significant number of non-believers, atheists, freethinkers, people commonly commenting on some of the atheist blogs that were writing about it, having this kind of epiphany about the power of symbol and how this kind of aesthetic branding Satanism had was so much more effective than a lot of what the atheists were trying to put in the public square when they were coming up with monuments or whatever else. And so it's not just tactical. I think it's something that really speaks to an individual and holds a certain amount of power. And embracing blasphemy like that can be very individually liberating. No, the Anton LaVey wrote a book he called The Satanic Bible in the 60s. It's not that great a book. It's okay. I really think the real Satanic Bible would be Milton's Paradise Lost, kind of a tedious read, but it kind of redefined the whole religious narrative. It really did make Satan into the hero of the story. And then other authors took off from that in the Romantic literary tradition, Blake, Byron, Shelley, and they wrote some great material. The one book that we really have primary in our canon amongst that is Anatole France's Revolt of the Angels. It tells a whole kind of world history through this metaphor of the religious narrative. And France was a non-believer himself, but he talked about the Dark Ages as being a result of Jehovah's oppressive stranglehold on the minds of people, an intentional effort to subjugate people and keep them from creative practices, keep them from learning scientific methods to refute the types of tales he was saying they should submit themselves to. And it's actually a very useful narrative as kind of a shorthand for understanding human history. And there was kind of a Satanization when the Enlightenment comes in. And in reality, you do see that in literature, and during the Enlightenment times, you see people trying to comprehend the cultural mythology in a different way to embrace Enlightenment values. And so there is a long history of literature that you can point to and say are really the Satanic Gospels. but there's no real one book. We have 7 tenets, and that's where we hold. When I was on Tucker Carlson most recently, I think he had me on so that he could disagree with me more strongly than he did the first time. The first time he had me on, he wanted to try to delegitimize Satanism as a religion. And I wasn't going to play that game because he was prone to cutting me off every time I tried explaining something. Satanism requires quite a bit of explanation. I knew I wasn't going to get that opportunity. I wasn't going to be able to run through our tenets. So I pushed all that aside. And since we were talking about our right to have a monument on public grounds that were declared a free speech zone, when he started saying we weren't a real religion, I just said it doesn't matter if you think we're a real religion or not. Nobody has to be a religion to have access to free speech. And religion doesn't have unique privilege to free speech. Tucker Carlson really imagines him a voice for free speech in the face of liberal censorship. So he had no choice but to agree with what I was saying. Next time he had me on, we had recently put out a press release floating the idea that if the Supreme Court rules in favor of discriminating against same-sex couples on religious grounds, we could have the same baker make a cake for Satan, for satanic religious practices if we wanted to order a cake. And what we were highlighting is that kind of disparity where religion is a protected class, but orientation isn't. So I think Tucker Carlson wanted me on, and this was only less than 2 months after my first appearance with him, because I think he felt that there was nothing he could agree with me on because he was going to hold to this line that somebody running a business should have the liberty to deny service to whoever they want. And I don't think he was expecting me to say, well, that's fine, but let's be consistent. Let's allow the gay shop owner to deny service to the evangelical theocrat who won't bake him a cake for his wedding. And Tucker Carlson had to agree with that, and I feel that him finding himself having to agree with me a second time really pushed him over the edge, and he started speculating that I must have had a horrible childhood, and ultimately he told me that I should crawl back into my hole before he cut the interview. And you can see footage of me still speaking before, after they had cut the audio and before they cut the video, and that was the end of the clip. But I was also thinking that he would have better arguments to present, and he didn't. And there's always the diehards, you know. I got responses from people who watch Tucker Carlson all the time, and they could see him doing no wrong, and they thought I looked like a fool, and furthermore, I have a scarred eye, so what do I know what I'm talking about, right? That's all they saw. But, and then there's the people on my side who, you know, just as likely, whatever my performance, they would have thought I had done really well. But I did feel that I saw a lot of commentary from middle ground that was very gratifying. And the first upload of that interview was from a very conservative channel. And there were a lot of comments on the YouTube feed that were saying things such as, you know, I'm a big fan of Tucker Carlson. I usually agree with him, but he really looked like a fool on this one. And I got a lot of messages to that effect, too. A lot of comments on my Facebook page. People who actually watch Tucker Carlson and don't realize he's a dumb shit anyway felt he looked like a dumb shit when he was talking to me. But I thought what was more interesting was the kind of hypocritical criticisms he was leveling against the Satanic Temple, that he was refusing to turn upon the very theocrats that we're engaging with when we do what we do at all. And I think it was most telling when he asked me during that interview, well, if you truly believe in what you're doing, if you're really a religious group, why can't you do this quietly? And he set himself up a mile away with that one. I was saying, if you're saying that we should practice our religions in our homes and in our churches and our places designated for that type of religious activity, I'm for that 100%. But what we're doing is we're coming into the public domain only when those doors have been kicked open by other religious groups that want exclusive access. And I mean, obviously that's the case, and he couldn't argue against that, but it was funny that he would even make such a point at all without ever having considered. And I think that's a kind of a prevalent problem. A lot of people will look at what the Satanic Temple is doing and say, by what right? Or they'll start examining our authenticity as a religion by whatever standards they put forward. That ship has fucking sailed. I mean, look at Hobby Lobby. At what point did anybody ask, how does a corporation claim religion? Furthermore, where can you point to any scripture that would justify the notion that a for-profit corporation shall not pay for healthcare benefits that include contraception? How often does this man who refuses to serve the same-sex couples go to church? How literally does he believe in the Bible? None of these questions are asked. All of a sudden, this type of thing is a question because the Satanic Temple claims that certain activities go against their own religiously held, deeply held beliefs. It's just too late. Well, even if we weren't doing what we were doing, I would consider myself a Satanist still. I probably wouldn't be so vocal about it, and there wouldn't be a need to unless I want to have myself ostracized. At the point where you come out publicly as a Satanist, you really need to vindicate yourself and make sure people know what you're talking about, and I've been stuck doing that for the past 4-5 years now, and it looks like I'll be at it a lot longer still. But for me, I'm a Satanist, and that does embody humanistic values, and it's atheistic, and I don't shy away from either of those labels as well. But I do object when people say, well, why don't you just call yourself a humanist, or why don't you just call yourself an atheist? And the answer is because I am a Satanist, and because this means something to me. The symbols are powerful for me, even when I don't believe in the story literally. And I think if you force a lot of people to examine their religious beliefs, and if you give them the opportunity to still have their religious community, their sense of ethics and identity, but renounce the supernaturalism, they'd probably take it.